Most athletes, most of us are not broken, right? We're just distracted. We're just not thinking about things in the right moment and processing things in the past, performing in the present, and planning properly for the future. If you don't process the past, it can leak into the present. If you don't stay in the present, you start to live out in an imagined future. You can do all the work, you can have all the talent, and you can still underperform if your attention isn't where your feet are. This is about learning how to live in the right moment on purpose, and that changes everything. Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Next Season Podcast, episode 39. Some of my worst games, and honestly, some of my most stressful seasons, had nothing to do with my talent, had nothing to do with my ability and potential or anything like that. They had everything to do with where my head was. I can remember being in the box. I was physically there, but mentally, I was two plays ahead or two plays behind. I was thinking, if I punch out here, what does that mean? If I don't play well this weekend, what does that mean? What does that say about my season? What does that say about my spot on the roster? If this keeps going sideways, what happens next? And I'd walk back to the dugout frustrated, thinking, why couldn't I just compete? Why couldn't I just show up the way that I know I'm capable, the way I've trained, the way I do in batting practice, the way I do in fielding practice? Why can't I just do that? The part that took me too long to figure out, way too long to figure out, is I wasn't failing because I wasn't prepared. I was failing because I was trying to live in the wrong moment. And once I saw it in baseball, I started seeing it everywhere else in life too. So it's the same thing off the field. I'd be in conversations with people I cared about, but my mind was somewhere else. I'd be working towards something meaningful, but already worried about how it might end and that things can go wrong and all these terrible scenarios. And I replay the old mistakes while trying to move forward. So physically, I was present, but mentally, I wasn't. I was split. And the common thread was always the same. My attention, my energy, and my effort were in the wrong place at the wrong time. This is part one of a two-part episode on what I call energy blocks. It's how we align our effort, our energy, and our focus to specific time blocks for a specific purpose. What I call process, perform, and prepare. And in this episode, I'm going to give you the background and some science on each phase, each of these blocks, each of these energy blocks. And then in the next episode, episode 40, I'm going to give you some practical tools that you can use or adapt and make your own so you can have agency in how you show up in those moments. What I've learned, again, I've learned this the hard way, and what I see all the time with athletes and high performers is that most people aren't stuck because they don't care enough or they're not it's not that they're not working hard. It's not that they're not talented. They're stuck because they're working in the wrong time block. They're replaying the past when it's time to compete. They're worrying about the future when it's time to execute. We're trying to figure things out and analyze in the moments that require presence and performance and decision making, like decisive decision making. And when that happens, that pressure is going to build up. Thinking specifically about worrying about the future and not being in the present, for me, worrying about the future didn't feel like anxiety. So I think a lot of times when we think about that pressure building up and we think about that catastrophizing in the future state, this nervousness about what might be or what could happen, a lot of times we attribute that to anxiety. I didn't associate or label these feelings as anxiety personally, which again, by the way, the feelings of anxiety are very normal. It's normal to feel a stress response about potential threats and to have some level of worry or nervousness about the future, because that what that does is that keeps us safe and alert. But when it goes too far and it interferes with our ability to participate in things, where the physical symptoms are persistent and too much, again, I'm not going into that. That can be anxiety. But to me and to many guys, it feels just like it's just pressure. We just feel pressure. And pressure showed up in my body before I ever really knew what it was. It was tight shoulders, it was shallow breathing. I was shake, right? I was have these shakes. I was actually talking to somebody, an athlete that I work with right now, and it was the same thing. It's like this tightening in the shoulders and this pressure up the back of the neck. And so we talked about specific things that you could do to recognize that, become aware of those feelings, which again are completely normal, but then physical things that you can do and emotional things that you do, mental things that you mental reps to help alleviate that pressure and set yourself back into the present moment. That's what this episode is about. And of course, the next episode as well. That's part two. So on the field, right, that pressure, that we'll call it anxiety, but it's pressure, but that showed up, that looked like me rushing throws, right? Or maybe holding on to the ball too long. It looked like swinging at bad pitches or completely freezing up and taking one right down the middle. It's playing to not mess up instead of playing to compete. Off the field, it looks like constantly asking, what if this doesn't work out? What if I'm falling behind? Why, comparing myself to other people and where they're at in their journey? What if I'm wasting my time? All these what if scenarios. Nothing bad was happening, but my nervous system was acting like it was. And that is the trap. In life, you can't perform and be present, and you can't have fun. It's really difficult to have fun and be loose and be free and have joy in those moments. And you certainly on the field can't play free when your brain is trying to protect you from a future that hasn't happened. This is the importance. That's just one example of the importance of dedicating the right energy and focus and presence into each of these energy blocks. You can't play free. And that's where this framework comes in. See, over time, I realized that there are really only three what I call energy blocks. You can call them phases, you can call them time blocks, you can call them time periods, whatever you want to call them. I call them energy blocks. There are three, and each one has a purpose. And we, as athletes, as performers, as professionals, we have one job or responsibility within each of these blocks. When you're thinking about the past, your job is to process the past. When you are in the present moment, your job is to perform in the present moment. And when you're thinking about the future, about what's next, your job, your responsibility is to prepare for what's next. Each of these energy blocks has a purpose, and your effort must be aligned to that purpose. Each one matters, but each one can only help you when your effort and your focus are aligned to that phase, to that time block, to that energy block. You cannot perform in the past. You can't plan for the future while you're living in the past. You can't process the present. It's already happening. You're there, right? It's the present moment. You can't process it. You can't think about the future, right? You definitely can't perform in the future. Purpose of giving effort to the past is to learn and process. The purpose of giving effort to the present is to perform and to compete. And the purpose of giving effort to the future is to plan and to prepare. You cannot steal your energy from the present to what happened in the past or what might happen in the future. That's not the purpose of the present moment. You give your effort to the past to process, to truly process what happened. You give your effort to the present to perform with everything that you have. And you give your effort to the future to prepare for what you want and what might come. And when your attention drifts into the wrong phase or the wrong energy block, that's when your confidence can drop. That's when that pressure really starts to rise and you start to feel that. It's when your focus can disappear. It's not because you're broken. It's not because there's anything wrong with you. It's because your mind is doing the wrong job. You are doing the wrong job in that moment. As a different example, if you're a server or waiter, right? You're waiting tables. You can't put in a food order before asking the table what they want, or you can't clean up before they're done eating, right? That's you're doing work. You're doing the right work, but you're doing it in the wrong moment. You can't deliver a meal to the table that was ordered by the family that was sitting in that table 2 hours earlier, right? You have to be present in the moment, perform in the moment. You have to learn from the past, and you have to prepare for the future, right? Each phase, each block has a purpose. And this conversation and this episode isn't about being perfect at this. I'm still working on it, and I'm going to be working on it the rest of my life. It's about learning how to notice where you are and gently bring your energy back to where it needs to be. And then setting up specific moments where you're dedicating that time block, that energy block to that task, right? Setting that time aside to process the past on purpose, setting that time aside to prepare for the future, right? And then, of course, when you're in that present moment, you are fully present and performing and executing in that moment. When you do this, everything is going to start to feel lighter. It's going to start to feel more clear. more control, you'll have more joy, and you'll be able to perform better. So let's start with the first phase, because if you don't handle this one well, it's going to leak into everything else. Processing the past. And here's what this actually means. You can't just move on. Moving is, telling yourself just move on, or having other people tell you, just move on. It's time to move on. It doesn't work. It doesn't work for most people. And that's how those unprocessed moments quietly follow you into the present. So let's talk about it. This is where a lot of people get stuck. And when I say processing the past, what I don't mean obsessing. I definitely don't mean pretending that it didn't happen. I used to do both. I still do both. There are times when I would replay a bad at bat in my head for days. And there were other times when I'd say, I'm good, I'm over it, when I clearly wasn't. And neither of those work. Because the truth is, and I had to learn the hard way, anything that you don't process properly is going to follow you. And that's the scary part of this whole thing is that unprocessed stuff usually doesn't yell. It kind of whispers. It's just kind of there in the background, but it impacts us. Hell, the last time that I swung a bat in a game, in a competitive game, was 2012. Just over 13. It was 13 years ago. It was a semi-pro men's league. So it didn't really like it wasn't even a big deal. But I still think about some of those at bats and those swings in those games. It's 2012. Since then, I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a business owner, I have a mortgage, busy life, dogs, all the adulting things. And I still think about those at bats in those plays. So as always, everything that I say to you, I'm saying to myself too. And to that point, the same things, the same principles apply off the field as well. A bad conversation, a mistake that I or you regret, a season that doesn't go how you want, right? But you tell yourself, I'm just going to move on. Like I'm going to be fine. I'll move on. Everything will be all right. But your nervous system doesn't forget those things. They leave an imprint. They leave a mark. And just because your mouth says that you're fine doesn't mean it's true. And now you're reacting to today through the lens of yesterday, whether that's consciously or subconsciously. You're reacting to today with that in mind. And here's what's happening in the brain, because the brain's job is to protect you. And when something feels threatening or embarrassing or painful or unresolved, your brain flags that as, hey, we need to remember this so it doesn't happen again. That's the amygdala doing its job, doing its thing. If you never slow down long enough to acknowledge and make sense of it, the brain is going to keep that open, right? It's going to keep that, it's going to make it creates open loops, right? It says that this task, this responsibility is still open, hasn't been closed, right? So that's mental noise, emotional, just tension, distraction in the present moment. Again, not because you're weak or broken or doing anything wrong, but your brain is unfinished with that experience, thinks it's still going on, and it's allowing it to drive decision making in the present and certainly for the future. And here's where a lot of athletes and professionals get tripped up. They think that processing the past means reliving it or beating themselves up about it and having shame and guilt or explaining why it wasn't their fault. So making excuses about it. That's not processing. That's ruminating. That's deflecting. Processing is different. Processing sounds like, yeah, that sucked. Okay. And here's the mistake I made. And here's what I'm going to do different. Here's what I actually control. And here's what was out of my control. Here's what I learned from it. And I'm done carrying this forward. I'm going to make decisions with this in mind, learning from it, but not allowing it to own me. There's closure in that. And here's why this matters so much. If you don't process the past properly, you don't stay stuck in the past. Okay. I think a lot of times, and I've thought this too, like if you don't process the past, you're going to stay stuck in it. What I've learned is you actually drag it into the present moment. That comes along with you, right? Because time keeps ticking. If you just sit down and think right now, like right this second, okay, that second now is gone. You have this second, and now this second is gone. Okay, so you're constantly moving through to the past. And so anything that you have that you haven't processed is it's dragging itself into the present. which brings us into that second phase. And honestly, the one that costs athletes and professionals the most opportunities. And that's performing in the present. Because you can do all the work, you can have all the talent, and you can still underperform if your attention isn't where your feet are. And let's talk about why this happens, especially when pressure and future thinking start to creep in. If processing the past is about closing those loops, it's about truly processing it, closing those loops, closing that task responsibility, understanding it happened, it's done, right? And what you learn from it, then performing in the present is about protecting focus. Processing the past is closing loops. Performing in the present is protecting your focus. And this is where I lost the most ground as an athlete, not because I didn't care, not because I wasn't prepared, but because my mind was constantly one pitch ahead or one mistake behind. I remember standing in the on deck circle, another big game, another big moment, um, without pressure, feeling that pressure. And there was this kind of semblance of confidence, like I knew because I knew I've done it before, and there was this pressure for the ambition that I had where I wanted to go, but the moment was it was bigger than me. I remember feeling small. I was thinking if I get a hit here, maybe I'll move up in the lineup. Maybe I'll start the next game. If I strike out, what's that conversation going to look like after? I can't screw this up. That's not confidence. That's pressure pretending to be motivation. And every time that I did that, my body would feel it before my brain admitted it. And I didn't realize this until much, much later. But my body, I would have tighter grip. I would have shallow breathing. I'd be rushed. And again, it's fight, flight, or freeze. I'd either swing at bad pitches that I shouldn't have swung at. I would let pitches go that I knew I could hit. Um, and again, that's just one example from batting, right? It applied in the field, it applied in life, it applied in relationships, it applied everywhere. Right? I looked calm. I looked like I was easygoing. I looked like I was ready, but I wasn't. I wasn't having fun. And I didn't enjoy the game I was playing. And it trickled into everything else again, school, relationships, work. Okay. How I show up as a husband and how I show up as a father, how I show up as a professional. Okay. That impacts every aspect of life. This isn't about trying harder to focus. Focus breaks down for a number of reasons, like your physical state, your nutrition, a whole bunch of things that impact your focus from a physiological perspective, but also your brain is protecting its identity. Your ego is defending defending yourself from potential outcomes. Your nervous system can be overloaded. And that's why cues and habits such as, following breath work or having a rhythm and a routine, right? They matter so much and they can be so helpful because they anchor you back into that present moment. We're going to talk more about those things and other tools that you can use in episode 40, the next episode. But I want to focus on kind of what's going on with each of these phases and time blocks, the energy blocks, and some of the science that goes along with it. So again, if you don't process the past, it can leak into the present. If you don't stay in the present, you start to live out in an imagined future, which brings us to that final phase, that third phase, which is preparing for the future. Because future focus is powerful, but only when you use it at the right time. I used to think that being future focused and goal oriented was about thinking about those goals and ambitions and desires, that things that I have, right? It doesn't. It means visiting the future and then coming back into that present moment, thinking about what it is that I want to do, and then saying, here's what I need to do to get there, and here's what I'm going to do today. I've made the mistake of tying my confidence to outcomes, to results. You know, am I going to get the playing time? Am I going to get drafted? Am I going to get this, that, and the other? All the money, the contracts, right? The job, the business recognition, the impact, all of it, all these external validations. And every time I did that, two things happened. My present performance suffered. My identity felt fragile. And I'll give you a third. I froze because I wanted all of the things. And so all of these ambitions came out and all these desires came out. And then all of the what if scenarios of everything that could go wrong would come out. And I just froze. And now every rep felt like a test of who I was instead of just planning and executing. That's not ambition. That's ambition with attachment because you become attached to all of these external things that really don't matter to you. What a healthy future focus really looks like is preparing for the future by setting direction and building systems and rehearsing mentally, not living there emotionally. And this is where goal setting and visualization and mental reps belong. It's not during the at bat, it's not in the present moment, it's not mid inning, but before and after those performance windows when you can sit down and you can reflect on what happened and then you can plan and prepare for what you want to come and how you're going to get there. So again, thinking about the goal setting and the visualization, the mental reps, we're going to talk about that in the next episode because those are tools. But as a kind of a little bit of a teaser, the visualization and really putting yourself in that moment and thinking about things, those mental reps, it works because the brain doesn't fully distinguish between real reps, like present moment real reps or practice reps, and what you're imagining. So when you do this, you're strengthening neural pathways without the physical wear and tear. But if you overdo that future thinking during performance, right, then that performance phase, that dopamine drops and your stress rises and your brain says, we're not there yet, right? We're not there yet. And performance can tighten up. So you need to prepare for the future. You need to perform in the present and you need to process the past. Each of these phases has a job. If you mix them up, you're going to pay for it. But here's the big takeaway. You don't struggle. I didn't struggle because I wasn't talented. I didn't struggle because I didn't have potential. I struggled and I failed ultimately with certain things. And I made those mistakes because my attention was in the wrong energy block at the wrong time. Most athletes, most of us, are not broken, right? We're just distracted. We're just not thinking about things in the right moment, processing things in the past, performing in the present where your feet are, and planning properly for the future. So I want you to ask yourself, am I processing something that has already happened? Am I performing where my feet are? Or am I worrying about something that hasn't happened yet? And then make those shifts. Before we wrap this up, again, this episode is part 1. This is about awareness. It's about understanding why you feel stuck, why you feel distracted, why there can be this heavy feeling, right? You feel overwhelmed, even when you're talented and even when you think you're prepared. Because most of us don't struggle with that lack of ability. We struggle because our time and energy and effort and attention are in the wrong moment. No one will perform like that. So today was all about the framework of process the past, perform in the present, prepare for what's next. And then in episode 40, we're going to make this actionable. I'm going to walk you through some simple science-backed tools that you can use to help you close those loops from the past, to help you recenter your focus and your nervous system in the present moment, and then to prepare for the future without that pressure, without that attachment, and hopefully to avoid some burnout. These are tools that I use personally and with athletes at every level, from high school to professionals, to reset focus, to manage the pressure, and to stay present when it matters the most. So if this episode helped you see the problem, episode 40 is going to give you some tools to help address it. And that's part 2. If this hits home, share it with a teammate, a parent, a coach, because this is bigger than baseball. This is about learning how to live in the right moment on purpose. And that changes everything. See you next time.